There's a moment when silence doesn't work. You step back expecting them to notice your absence. They don't. You stop chasing, thinking they'll come running. They stay distant. You hold your silence, waiting for them to wonder, to question, to feel the void you've left. But instead, they carry on as if nothing happened, no message, no reaction, no sign that they miss you. What now? Most people are taught that silence is the ultimate power move, and often it is. When used correctly, silence forces reflection, shifts dynamics, and makes others reconsider their actions. But what if it doesn't? What if your silence doesn't create longing, but instead confirms their detachment? This is where most people break. They panic. They start second-guessing themselves. Maybe I should reach out. Maybe I should explain myself. Maybe they didn't notice, and I need to make them notice. And in that moment, they lose all the power their silence was supposed to build. But a Stoic does not chase. A Stoic does not crumble under indifference. A Stoic understands that silence is only the first move, and when it doesn't work, a new strategy must take its place, not out of desperation, but out of control. So, what do you do when silence fails? How do you respond with strength, not weakness? In this article, we're going deep into Stoicism and how it applies to relationships. If you've ever gone silent and didn't get the reaction you expected, stay with me, because this will change the way you handle relationships forever. When recognizing when silence fails. Silence is often seen as a weapon, a strategic move that shifts power dynamics in relationships. You withdraw, expecting them to notice. You stop reaching out, believing they will feel your absence. You wait, convinced that they will start questioning, doubting and longing. But what if they don't? What if your silence isn't met with regret or curiosity, but with indifference? This is the moment that most people fear. The moment when silence, the tool they counted on, appears powerless. And in that moment of doubt, they begin to panic. They wonder if they should send a message, explain themselves, or make their presence known again. But this is exactly where they lose control. To understand why silence sometimes fails, we need to break free from the assumption that it always works. Silence is powerful only if the other person is emotionally invested. It is not a magic trick that works on everyone. If your silence isn't having an impact, there are 3 key reasons why. First, they don't care enough to notice. This is a hard truth, but one that must be acknowledged. When someone is emotionally attached to you, your absence triggers discomfort. They notice the space you once occupied, and they feel a void. But if they are indifferent, your silence is meaningless. It doesn't create longing because they never truly valued your presence in the first place. In this case, your silence does not signal power. It simply confirms that they have already moved on, mentally and emotionally. The second reason your silence may fail is that they assume you'll come back. If you have a history of always being the one to return, they won't take your withdrawal seriously. People learn patterns of behavior. If you have always reached out after an argument, always been the one to mend things, always made sure they knew you were still there, then they expect you to do it again. In their mind, this is not a permanent silence. It is just another round of the same cycle. Instead of feeling your absence, they see it as a temporary phase, something that will inevitably end with you reaching out. And because they expect it, your silence holds no weight. It is predictable. And predictable actions do not create tension or urgency. They breed complacency. The third and final reason is the most difficult one to accept. They have already detached emotionally. Sometimes silence does not create longing because the other person has already mentally checked out. If they have lost respect, attraction, or emotional connection, then your absence is not an interruption. It is a relief. This is the most painful realization, because it forces you to confront the fact that they no longer see you as significant enough to miss. And when this happens, many people react by chasing. They break their silence in an attempt to force a reaction. They want to remind the other person of their presence, to re-establish the connection that feels like it's slipping away. But this is exactly where they fall into a trap. The trap is reacting emotionally to their indifference. This is where most people make their biggest mistake. They assume that their silence was a failure, so they immediately act out of desperation. They send a message, hoping for a response. They post something attention-seeking, hoping to be noticed. They even try to orchestrate a situation where they accidentally run into the other person. And just like that, all the power they had by withdrawing disappears. Because the moment you try to force a reaction, you confirm that their indifference has power over you. A Stoic, however, sees things differently. A Stoic does not panic. A Stoic does not chase. A Stoic understands that silence is a test, and if they do not react, then the answer is clear. There is nothing more to wait for. There is no hidden meaning to decode, no games to play, just truth. And truth, no matter how painful, is always an advantage, because once you see reality clearly, you stop wasting time on what does not serve you. Instead of lingering in uncertainty, hoping for a change that may never come, a Stoic accepts the result and makes a new move. The power of Stoic relationships lies in the ability to recognize when something no longer holds value. When silence fails, it is not a sign to break it. It is a sign to redirect your focus, because the real test is not whether they will react. It is whether you will maintain your control even when they don't. Most people crumble in this moment. They spiral into self-doubt, wondering if they should have done something differently. But the truth is, when someone does not value your presence enough to feel your absence, that is your answer. It is not an invitation to chase. It is an opportunity to detach. And this is where the real shift begins. Because now, the next move is no longer about them. It's about you. If silence has no effect, then the next step is not to fight for attention. It is to completely shift your energy elsewhere. And this is what separates those who remain stuck from those who truly evolve. The real power move is not in waiting. It is in what you do next. 2. Avoiding emotional reactions. When silence fails, the first instinct for most people is to panic. The moment they realize their absence hasn't made an impact, they start to second-guess themselves. Maybe I should check in. Maybe they didn't notice. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I should explain. These thoughts spiral into a desperate need for validation. But the moment you break your silence to seek reassurance, you confirm one thing. You were never in control to begin with. You weren't using silence as a position of strength. You were using it as a tactic to manipulate their response. And when that tactic doesn't work, you scramble for another way to get their attention. This is where most people fall. Instead of holding their ground, they let fear of being forgotten push them into chasing the very thing they were trying to distance themselves from. A common mistake people make is reaching out impulsively. The silence becomes unbearable, so they send a message. It may be casual, disguised as a simple check-in, but the intention is clear. They want a reaction, and if they don't get one, they send another, then another. Before they know it, they are in full pursuit mode, trying to rekindle a connection that the other person isn't even fighting to keep. What does this do? It reinforces the wrong dynamic. Instead of making the other person feel your absence, you prove that your silence was never a real withdrawal. It was just a test. And now that the test has failed, you're right back where they expected you to be. This makes them respect you even less, because people do not value what is readily available and easily predictable. Another common reaction is attention-seeking behavior. Some people, instead of directly reaching out, try to get a response through indirect means. They post something designed to provoke curiosity, a cryptic message, a photo, an update that subtly signals they are moving on. But here's the problem with this strategy. It is still reactionary. When you post something for the purpose of making them notice, you are still operating from a place of neediness. It is an attempt to manipulate their emotions rather than truly detaching. And the truth is, people can sense when you're doing something for their attention rather than for yourself. They might see the post, but instead of feeling drawn back to you, they feel validated in their decision to detach, because now they know you're still thinking about them. And that means they still hold the power. Even worse is the third reaction: creating accidental encounters. When silence isn't working, some people try to bump into the person they are hoping to reach. They might suddenly start showing up at places where they know the other person frequents, hoping for a chance encounter that reignites a lost connection. But this is the most transparent and self-sabotaging reaction of all. Why? Because it strips away every ounce of dignity that silence was meant to establish. Silence is about letting go, not scheming for another chance. And if you have to manufacture opportunities to be seen, then you were never really in control to begin with. A Stoic, however, does not react. A Stoic does not break their silence out of fear. A Stoic does not engage in games. When silence fails, the Stoic does not panic. They adapt. This is the difference between emotional weakness and emotional strength. Most people react to being ignored, but a Stoic repositions themselves in a way that makes their absence impossible to ignore. They do not chase. They shift their focus. They do not seek validation. They build self-respect. And instead of posting, texting, or forcing encounters, they let their absence become a statement of finality. Now ask yourself this: have you ever broken your silence just to see if they would respond? Have you ever posted something hoping they would react? Have you ever made excuses to cross paths with them? If you have, you're not alone. Most people have done this at some point. But the real question is, did it work? Did it truly bring them back? Or did it only make you feel weaker, more dependent, more frustrated? If your goal is to reclaim your power in Stoic relationships, then the answer is not in chasing. It is in becoming unshakable. The moment you stop reacting, you start shifting the dynamic, and that is where the real transformation begins. So if you've ever made these mistakes, now is the time to correct them. And if this is resonating with you, like and comment #1 below if you want to see more content like this. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, because what's coming next will change the way you approach relationships forever. 3. Shifting focus from waiting to evolving. When silence fails, most people make the mistake of waiting. They tell themselves they are being patient, that eventually the other person will notice their absence. Days pass, then weeks. They check their phone. They overanalyze every interaction. They wonder if they should have done something differently. But what they fail to realize is that waiting is not power. It is stagnation. And stagnation is the opposite of control. If silence is met with indifference, then the solution is not to wait longer. It is to shift your focus entirely. A Stoic does not wait for someone else to determine their worth. A Stoic does not linger in uncertainty, hoping for validation that may never come. Instead, they redirect their energy into self-mastery. Because here's the truth: the more time you spend obsessing over their reaction, the less power you have over your own life. And this is where most people get stuck. They keep replaying the past, searching for meaning in someone else's indifference. But what if that energy was spent on something greater? What if, instead of waiting for them to notice your absence, You made your presence in the world so powerful that they couldn't ignore it, even if they tried. This is where evolution begins. Most people believe that moving on is about time, that if they wait long enough, the pain will fade. But that's a passive approach. Real transformation is not about time, it's about intention. It's about what you do with that time. The difference between those who heal and those who stay stuck is not how much time has passed, but how they choose to spend it. So, where do you start? First, you stop checking for a reaction. You stop looking at their social media, stop waiting for a message, stop analyzing their behavior. Because every time you do, you are tethering yourself to a situation that is no longer serving you. Detachment is not about pretending you don't care. It is about actively choosing to prioritize yourself over someone who does not prioritize you. And this shift is not just mental, it must be active. It must be seen in what you do next. Instead of waiting, you build. You channel all the energy that was once wasted on worrying, wondering, and waiting into something tangible. Your mind, your body, your skills, your purpose. Because here's what most people don't understand. The best way to make someone feel your absence is not through silence alone. It is through transformation. When people expect you to be stuck and instead they see you evolving, that is what makes them take notice. Think about it. When was the last time you truly focused on your own development, not as a distraction, not as a way to impress someone else, but for yourself? The greatest mistake people make in relationships is losing themselves. They invest so much in someone else that when that person pulls away, they feel empty. But that emptiness is not because the other person left. It's because they stopped investing in themselves. And now they are forced to confront the void they ignored for so long. A Stoic does not allow their identity to be dependent on someone else's presence. They do not sit around hoping for closure or waiting for someone to validate their worth. Instead, they create. They take what was once an emotional weakness and turn it into strength. They take the time they would have spent waiting and use it to elevate themselves in every way possible. And in doing so, they regain control, not just over the situation, but over their entire life. When you shift your focus from waiting to evolving, something incredible happens. You stop feeling powerless. You stop obsessing over their absence because you are too busy building your presence. And suddenly, the entire situation changes. Because now, if they do come back, they are no longer returning to the same version of you. They are returning to someone who has grown beyond them. And that is the ultimate power move. Not to make them regret losing you, but to make yourself so strong that their validation no longer matters. And this is the part no one tells you. When you truly evolve, you may no longer even want what you once waited for, because once you've experienced the power of choosing yourself, you'll never tolerate being an afterthought again. 4. Becoming the source, not the seeker. When silence fails, most people instinctively shift from waiting to seeking. They stop waiting for the other person to notice, but instead of truly moving forward, they start looking for ways to force a reaction. They begin strategizing, wondering, how can I make them miss me? How can I trigger an emotional response? How can I regain their attention? But this entire mindset is flawed because it is still rooted in external validation. The truth is, the more you seek, the more you reinforce. The idea that your happiness and self-worth depend on someone else's acknowledgement. A Stoic does not function this way. A Stoic does not chase, does not plead, does not manipulate. A Stoic becomes the source, a force so self-sufficient and powerful that people naturally gravitate toward them, not because they seek attention, but because they embody it. What does it mean to become the source instead of the seeker? It means you stop orienting your life around external validation and start drawing people in through your personal growth, energy, and presence. Most people try to control relationships through manipulation, whether consciously or subconsciously. They try to trigger jealousy, create mystery, or use silence as a tool to make the other person feel their absence. But the highest form of control is not needing control at all. The highest form of power is being so deeply committed to your own self-mastery that others cannot help but take notice. Not because you are playing a game, but because you are simply operating at a higher level of existence. Think about the most magnetic people you know, the ones who walk into a room and without saying a word demand respect, the ones who never chase but always seem to be in control of their presence. What makes them different? Do you think they waste time wondering if someone is thinking about them? Do you think they refresh their phones hoping for a text? Do you think they spend their energy analyzing what someone else is doing on social media? No, because they have become the source. Their energy is centered, their confidence is undeniable. Their presence speaks louder than words, and this is exactly where you need to be. Most people make the mistake of acting like they are moving on rather than actually moving on. They try to appear busy. They try to post things that look exciting. They try to create the illusion that they are unaffected, when in reality, they are still deeply waiting for validation. But real power, real growth, real transformation, it isn't about appearing indifferent. It's about actually outgrowing the need for their attention. The second you shift your focus away from them and onto yourself, everything changes. They are no longer the center of your world, and that is when the dynamic completely shifts. So, how do you make this transition? First, you stop seeking their attention in any way. That means no cryptic posts, no subtle attempts to make them jealous, no manufactured encounters, and no waiting. You remove the need to be noticed because the moment you do, you become free. And that freedom is what makes you powerful. Because when someone sees that you are no longer reacting to them, no longer waiting, no longer caring if they notice, that is when you truly become unforgettable. Second, you shift all the energy that was once directed toward them and channel it into yourself. Most people obsess over what someone else is thinking, wondering if they miss them, wondering if they care. But imagine if you redirected all of that energy into building yourself into someone they would regret losing, not because you are trying to make them regret it, but because you are too focused on your own evolution to be affected by their absence. This is the foundation of Stoic relationships, to be so deeply rooted in self-growth that external reactions become irrelevant. Third, you create a life that is so fulfilling, so rich, so abundant, that whether or not they come back becomes meaningless. Most people think that detachment means cutting off feelings, but true detachment is knowing that you will be fine regardless of what happens. It's understanding that their presence or absence does not define you. It's building yourself up in such a way that your world does not shrink without them. It expands. And when they see that, when they realize that you did not just survive without them, but thrived beyond them, that is when they begin to feel the weight of their absence. This is the paradox. The more you seek attention, the less power you have. But the moment you stop seeking and start becoming, you naturally draw people in. Not because you need them to notice, but because your presence becomes something they cannot ignore. When you elevate yourself, physically, mentally, emotionally, you radiate confidence in a way that demands respect. And that is when the entire dynamic shifts. So now ask yourself, have I been seeking? Have I been chasing in subtle ways? Have I been waiting for validation rather than building my own sense of self-worth? If the answer is yes, then it is time to change. It is time to stop looking outward and start looking inward. It is time to become the source. Because when you do, the game is no longer about getting their attention. It is about redefining who you are. And if this is resonating with you, like and comment number 1 below if you want to see more content like this. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, because in the next section, we are going even deeper into the ultimate power move, reversing their expectations. 5. Reversing their expectations. People are predictable. They form expectations based on past behavior. They assume they know how you will respond because they have seen it before, and this is where they gain power. If they expect you to chase, they will not feel urgency. If they assume you will always be available, they will not value your presence. If they believe that your silence is just temporary, they will not feel the weight of your absence. They hold control, not because they are more powerful, but because they believe they can predict you. But what happens when you break that pattern? What happens when you become unpredictable? That is when the entire dynamic shifts. A Stoic understands that power in Stoic relationships comes from one thing: control over one's own actions and reactions. When you let someone predict your behavior, you give them a psychological advantage. They anticipate your moves. They assume they have all the time in the world. They think they know what you will do next. But when you break the pattern, when you become the one they can no longer predict, you force them to reconsider everything. Most people believe that to regain control, they need to do something big, make a dramatic statement, completely cut someone off, or attempt to trigger a reaction. But the most powerful shift is often the subtle one. It is not in words. It is not in grand gestures. It is in the silent yet undeniable transformation that makes the other person feel the difference without you having to say a single word. That is what reversal truly is. Not an act of revenge, not a manipulation tactic, but an internal shift that naturally forces the other person to see you differently. Think about it. If they are used to you being the one to reach out, what happens when you never do again? If they expect you to wait, what happens when you are suddenly too busy living your life? If they assume you are still hoping for them to return, what happens when they see that you have completely moved forward, not in a performative way, not in a way that seeks their attention, but in a way that is so deeply real that they feel your absence in a way they never expected? Most people, when faced with being ignored, either break their silence too soon or double down on trying to force a response. But Stoicism teaches something different: detachment from external reactions. The goal is not to make them feel regret. The goal is not to make them chase you. The goal is to break free from the cycle where their validation determines your actions. And the irony, the moment you truly detach, that is when they start to feel the shift. That is when they start questioning. That is when they start wondering if they miscalculated, if they assumed they knew your next move, but now they realize they were wrong. A powerful shift happens when someone realizes they no longer have the control they thought they did. They start paying attention, not because you force them to, but because their mind cannot comprehend the change. Why aren't you reaching out? Why haven't you reacted? Why are you not doing what they expected? This is not about playing games. This is about finally making it clear that you are not someone who operates on their terms. You are someone who moves forward with or without them. And that realization alone is what creates the real power dynamic shift. So, how do you apply this? You start by doing the opposite of what they expect. If they expect a message, stay silent. If they assume you are still thinking about them, redirect your focus completely. If they believe they can come back whenever they want, remove that option. And most importantly, do not announce any of it. The mistake most people make is telling the other person they are moving on, thinking that will create urgency. But real transformation is silent. You do not need to tell them you have changed. They will feel it, they will see it, and by the time they do, it will already be too late for them to do anything about it. This is how power is regained. Not through loud declarations, not through desperate attempts to be noticed, but through a shift so profound that their entire perception of you changes. This is not about creating a temporary reaction. It is about permanently breaking free from the patterns that kept you stuck. And once you do that, everything shifts, not just in your relationship with them, but in your relationship with yourself. Because now you are no longer playing their game. You have elevated yourself to a level where they must now figure out how to engage with you on your terms. 6. Mastering the art of indifference. Indifference is the ultimate power. It is the difference between those who remain trapped in emotional cycles and those who move forward with clarity and strength. Most people misunderstand what true indifference is. They assume it means suppressing emotions, pretending not to care or acting cold and detached. But real indifference, the kind that holds power, is not about pretending at all. It's about reaching a point where their actions, their decisions, and their presence no longer dictate your emotions, mindset, or direction in life. It is not an act. It is a shift in your very foundation. Most people, when silence fails, fall into one of two traps. They either react emotionally and chase, or they try too hard to prove that they don't care. But both responses stem from the same problem: attachment to their validation. If you are still thinking about how to make them miss you, if you are still crafting strategies to regain their attention, if you are still feeling the need to prove something to them, then you are not indifferent. You are still emotionally invested. And as long as they hold emotional weight in your mind, they still have power over you. So how do you master true indifference? It begins with removing their ability to affect your state of mind. Most people are ruled by external circumstances. When someone gives them attention, they feel worthy. When someone withdraws, they feel rejected. But a Stoic does not fluctuate based on external validation. A Stoic remains centered, grounded, and internally fulfilled regardless of what others do. This is not about acting indifferent. This is about building a life so rich, so full, so purpose-driven that their presence or absence no longer holds significance. You do not need to pretend that you are unaffected because you genuinely are. The first step toward this level of control is to redirect every ounce of energy you once gave to them and invest it back into yourself. Most people spend an enormous amount of mental and emotional energy analyzing someone else's actions, checking social media, wondering what they are thinking, waiting for a message, dissecting their behaviors. But imagine if all that energy was redirected into your own growth. Imagine if, instead of thinking about them, you focused on becoming the most disciplined, focused, and fulfilled version of yourself. Imagine if, instead of waiting, you created a life that made their absence feel insignificant. That is the foundation of Stoic relationships. You do not let external forces dictate your inner state. When someone expects you to chase and you don't, they start to wonder why. When they assume you are still emotionally invested, but you are too occupied with your own growth to even notice their absence, they feel it in ways they never anticipated. This is the essence of true indifference. You are not ignoring them to make a statement. You are too focused on your own evolution to even register their absence as something worth reacting to. A powerful transformation happens when you genuinely stop needing closure, explanations, or reactions. Most people stay trapped because they want answers. They want to know why the other person didn't react. They want to understand what went wrong. They want to hear some final confirmation that they mattered. But a Stoic understands that not everything needs closure, because not everything deserves energy. The moment you let go of the need for answers is the moment you reclaim your power. When you stop seeking, stop chasing, stop caring about whether they come back or not, something interesting happens. The energy shifts. You no longer radiate neediness or attachment. You radiate strength. You do not have to post things to make them notice. You do not have to send messages to remind them of your presence. Your transformation, your progress, your ability to move forward without hesitation, that is what speaks louder than any words ever could. Now ask yourself, Am I truly indifferent, or am I still waiting for validation in some form? Because the moment you can honestly say, their actions do not affect me anymore, is the moment you have won. That is real freedom. That is real control. That is when you are no longer playing their game. You are living on your terms. If this mindset shift is hitting deep, like and comment #1 below if you want to see more content like this. And if you're serious about mastering Stoicism in relationships and in life, subscribe to the channel, because the final section will reveal the ultimate power move, being completely out of reach when they finally decide to come back. 7. When they come back, you've already moved on. It always happens. Maybe not immediately, maybe not in the way you expected, but at some point they realize what they lost. They feel the absence in ways they never anticipated. The silence that once seemed insignificant now carries weight. The confidence they took for granted is now something they miss. And the person they assumed would always be there is now untouchable. But here's the real question. Will it even matter to you by then? Most people spend so much time hoping for this moment. They imagine the day the other person reaches out, the day they finally regret walking away. They believe that if they just hold on long enough, stay silent long enough, play their cards right, they will eventually get the reaction they always wanted. But here's what Stoicism teaches. If you have truly evolved, their return is no longer the victory. The real victory is that you no longer need their validation at all. Think about how much time you've spent in the past waiting for someone to realize your worth. Think about all the energy you poured into analyzing their actions, hoping they would recognize what they lost. And now ask yourself, was that ever real power? Was that ever real control? Or was it just another way of giving them free access to your mind and emotions? The truth is, when you truly move forward, you do not sit around waiting for the past to correct itself. You do not base your healing on whether they eventually regret their decisions. You heal because you chose yourself first. By the time they come back, you should be so far ahead in your own journey that their return feels irrelevant. Not because you are bitter, not because you are trying to prove a point, but because their presence or absence no longer dictates your life. You have outgrown the need for closure, the need for explanations, the need for any final moment of validation. That is real detachment. That is real freedom. But here's where most people go wrong. They think moving on means pretending not to care while secretly hoping for a reunion. They tell themselves they are over it, but deep down, they are still waiting. And when that text finally comes, when that moment finally happens, they feel the pull, the old emotions, the old memories, the old patterns threatening to drag them back. But a Stoic does not allow history to repeat itself. A Stoic does not romanticize what has already been proven to be weak. A Stoic sees things as they are, not as they wish them to be. When someone comes back, it is not because they suddenly became a better person. It is not because they had an awakening and now love you in ways they never did before. It is because something in their life has changed, and now they feel your absence. Maybe they realized no one else offered the same energy. Maybe they assumed you would always be there and now see that they miscalculated. Maybe they are simply curious, wondering if they still hold the same power over you. Whatever the reason, it no longer matters, because their return does not define you. The true power move is being unavailable, not as a strategy, not as a way to make them chase, but because you are genuinely too far ahead to entertain the past. By the time they reach out, you should be so invested in your own evolution that the thought of stepping back into an old dynamic feels unnatural. You have outgrown it, you have moved beyond it. You have become someone who no longer fits into the role they once assigned to you. Most people, when faced with the return of someone they once wanted, feel an internal battle. Should I respond? Should I give them another chance? What if this? Time is different, but the moment you ask those questions, you are already giving away power, because if they had valued you the first time, they would not have left room for regret. And if you have truly transformed, then their presence now offers nothing that aligns with your new standard. A Stoic relationship is built on self-respect, and self-respect means you do not reopen doors that were already closed for a reason. You do not let someone back in just because they finally decided to see your value, because your value was never meant to be discovered on their timeline. Your worth was never meant to be a delayed realization. And the fact that they see it now does not mean you should make space for them again. So when they come back, what will you do? Will you fall into the cycle again, mistaking their return for love instead of convenience? Or will you be so firmly rooted in your own self-worth that their presence no longer moves you? The real power is in realizing that you never needed them to regret losing you. The real power is in knowing that no matter what they do, you have already moved forward. And that is what makes you truly untouchable. Silence was never about them. It was always about you. It was never a game to make them chase, never a tactic to force regret. It was a moment of clarity, a test that revealed everything you needed to know. And if they did not react, if they did not notice, if they carried on as if you never mattered, then that was the answer. The mistake most people make is believing that silence is about waiting, about creating longing, about testing patience. But true silence, the kind that holds power, is about acceptance. Acceptance that if someone does not feel your absence, it means they never truly valued your presence. And once you understand this, you stop wasting time searching for reactions. You stop analyzing their behavior. You stop hoping for closure that will never come. Instead, you shift your energy inward. You stop waiting and start evolving. You become the source, no longer the seeker. You break their expectations, mastering the art of indifference. And when they finally return, when they finally realize what they lost, you have already moved so far forward that the past is no longer a temptation. It is a reminder of how much you've grown. Because the true power move is never about making them regret losing you. It is about becoming so complete, so whole within yourself, that their regret is irrelevant. That is what Stoicism teaches. That is what true detachment looks like. And that is how you reclaim your power. If this resonated with you, if you see the shift happening within yourself, take this mindset and apply it, not just to relationships, but to every area of your life. Keep building, keep evolving, and never let the past have more power over you than your future deserves.